Hello, my name is Allison Fink, and today I'd like to talk to you about part 2, which lists my two favorite themes from the Old Testament. The first theme is that of the kinsman redeemer. And this term isn't really talked about until later in the Old Testament, but it first shows up in Genesis. When Adam and Eve fell, God cursed the serpent, and then he cursed the woman, and then he cursed the man. And when he was cursing the serpent, he said that he would put enmity between the serpent and the woman's seed. And there was the promised seed who would come and crush the head of the serpent. And this is actually the first mention of God raising up a person who is a brother to humanity to come and rescue them and redeem them. Then Moses was another example of this. He was raised up from the people of Israel, and this is explained in Exodus 5:1. He was raised up as a brother to everyone in Israel, and he became someone who would redeem them by leading them out of the place of Egypt and into freedom in the promised land. And in the law, there was some new guidelines put in place for the Israelites. In Deuteronomy 25:5-10, and then in Leviticus 25:47-55, it lists how a brother of someone who has been wronged can represent them and redeem on the other person's behalf. And so this sets in place the kinsman redeemer law that Boaz and Ruth follow in Ruth 3:9, where Boaz decides to represent Ruth and marry her and take care of her because he is the closest of kin. And this as a precursor to Jesus. And interestingly enough, Boaz and Ruth were ancestors of Jesus himself. Hosea also gives a prophetic example of this, about how God has a wife that is not faithful, who he just chooses to redeem from all the terrible things that she has done, even though she doesn't deserve that. And that shows another example of the kinsman redeemer theme. So this theme weaves throughout the entire Old Testament, from beginning to end, from Genesis to the prophets, and it's shown in many more places than I have listed, but I think this is an absolutely fascinating theme to see. The second theme is that God is faithful to his people. With Abraham, God told him that he would be able to take him to a place where he would find peace, he would have a promised land, he would have children, he would have descendants that were more numerous than the sand in the sea. And he promised this even though there was really no indication that this was even possible in Genesis 12:1-3. And then he made good on his promise when the people were stuck in Egypt and they were slaves. He led them out of the land of Egypt in Exodus 22. And they were brought into the promised land, which is something that God had promised back to Abraham. So he was following through on that promise he had given so long ago in Exodus 6:8. And later on, when the people betrayed God and they sinned against him, God still rescued them and brought them into the land. Ezekiel 37:21 explains this. So God was faithful to bring them back to that land that he had promised to Abraham, even though they were sinful throughout the Old Testament. And the promised land is a picture of heaven and what God is promising to his people and how God is always faithful to his people. Now, both of these different themes, the theme of the kinsman redeemer and the theme of God's faithfulness, are both woven throughout the Old Testament, and they contribute to the larger story, but they also have individual importance. So first of all, the kinsman redeemer proves to us how much God actually cares about us. He became one of us. He took on our frame. He took on our pain. He took on our situation. He became just like us to rescue us. He is just like us, but he is also our rescuer. And that's a huge picture of what Jesus becomes later on in the New Testament. And so the kinsman redeemer is important because it points to exactly who Jesus is, who he's supposed to be like to us, and helps us be able to see how he is going to move in the future. And the second theme of God's faithfulness to his people is important because it shows that God's trustworthy. when God makes a promise, he follows through. And so we don't have to be afraid. We don't have to question things. We don't have to doubt whether God will actually follow through with his word, because he always, always does, even when we make terrible, terrible mistakes. And so both of these are individually extremely important because they point to God's character and who he is. Thank you.